Hi everybody, it's Colin Stevenson here, joined by my hero, John Leonard. Hi John.
Hi.
Now, our last episode, you ran us through 2007, 2008, or was it 2008, 2009?
2007, 2008.
Now it's going to be 2009 onwards, right? Okay. So, John, you don't need to really give us a recap, but if you can tell us from where you left off to how the transition moving forward happened, please.
So the first 2 years that Modeling God came out, there was an ambitious pastor who was attacking me publicly on the internet. And he was the only one who read the book, and he had 200 factual errors. He misquoted it. All these other pastors felt like they didn't have to read it. There was this big pastor who was trashing me privately to people. And then there was this emergent church made up of these crabs that were trashing me as well. So the first 2 years the book comes out, they're doing all this. I'm still interacting with them. I'm still trying to talk. I'm still trying to get answers. I'm still 3 questions. They won't give any answers. And in 2009, the ambitious pastor says, I'm done talking to you. Then he gets this pastor. Now, he was not a member of this group of pastors. The group is called the FCEMF. And I'm going to use the term group of pastors from now, this pastor group. But it was the Fox Cities Evangelical Ministry Fellowship. So it's a group of pastors that get together once a month. This ambitious pastor is not a part of that, but he gets people sideways. Now the big pastor was, and they find a pastor in that group who sees himself as the bishop over the valley. So I'm going to call this guy the bishop.
Yep.
And this guy enables the ambitious bullying pastors ambitious. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the story now about this enabler, the bishop, and this group of pastors, this pastor organization. So this ambitious pastor says, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And then a month later, he gets this guy and goes, we're going to meet. So the painter and I go to meet the bishop and the ambitious pastor. And the ambitious pastor says, I am going to publish this group of pastors is going to publish this letter. So he got this group of pastors to publish this letter. He wants them to publish this letter. And he goes, we're going to publish this letter unless you admit you're wrong. Well, I'm not wrong. And we look at the letter, and I wanted to talk about the point. We're not going to talk about your book. We're not going to talk about any of this. This meeting's purely for us, basically to threaten you and for you to cave in. So we go, no. And at the meeting, I said, you have this website, Leonhard Eats Rocks. I'm trying to get a job. I had a job lined up in Utah with a detergent company. Flew out. Everything was going great. They went to make me an offer. Never heard from them again. Tried to write them. And I told him, I said, I'm trying to get jobs. I can't get a job. I go, people are looking at your website. So this is 2009. People start Googling you. They see this and they're not hiring me. I go, you're preventing me from, I'm trying to leave this valley. Why don't you just let me leave this valley? I'll go live in Utah. You'll never hear from me again. I'm going to get out of this valley. Nope, you're not, he goes, I get hits from all over the world on my website. He was proud of the fact that it was correct me. I'm like, I'm going to end up having to declare bankruptcy. And I did. So just so you know, spoiler alert, in 2010, I ended up declaring bankruptcy because of what's about to happen here is just the amount of abuse. And I'm trying to get a job. And this was the early days of the internet where we didn't know all this bullying through the internet, how it causes people to go. So I could now not get a job. I tried to apply, people looked me up, they'd see this. I try to tell this to the bishop. The bishop's like, well, maybe God wants you to stay here. The bishop was loving how the pastors were all unified. Yep. The pastors in this valley, one of the things about this area at this time in 2009, there were more people who had been to church and no longer go to church than were in church. So more than half of the people weren't going to church anymore that go to church. That statistic is now true across the country. But 12 years ago, that area of the country was really bad because these pastors were just, I'm telling you the story, you could see how they just fight. They're afraid of whispering and gossiping and attacks and bullying. And this bishop was like, these pastors are all unified over their hatred for you. Now, he didn't say that part, but that's what he was loving. He was like, this is great. And he said, the thing is that you're not willing to meet with these pastors. That's what he was trying to say. So now the following happened in 2 months. I'm going to list to you the following things that happened because and I had to kind of write it down because I want to get these exactly right for you to understand. The pastors group letter went up July 3rd, 2009. So basically 12 years ago this month. The bishop didn't know it went up because he had been talking with us, and he had them take it down. And then he told the painter we would get a chance to respond because he knew the painter personally. He goes, we'll get a chance to respond. He asked the painter to write a letter. The painter wrote a letter, had a bunch of people sign it. I didn't even sign it. He gave it to the bishop to give to the pastors. And he said, I'll share it with the pastor group. Their letter went back up like a couple days later, attacking me. And so then the bishop told the painter, I never shared your letter with the group. So he said he wanted a letter to share it. He never shared it with them. So the bishop said, I'd like to invite those pastors to meet with us. And he did it through the bishop. The bishop shows up at the meeting and said, I didn't let any of the other pastors know you invited us to the meeting. I alone will come to the meeting. So this guy is an enabler, and he's playing this in-between game. So these people that I'd helped, they're all sharing how they got over these addictions and all these, they got healed from all this stuff. And he said, this information has obviously helped all of you, but maybe a person's life has to get really bad before this information could help them. So now he's rationalizing why I don't want the people in my church to have this information. I don't want people in the rest of the valley to have this information to help them. Maybe it just has to be this bad. And then he told them, I wasn't even in this meeting. He said, listen, the pastor of the ambitious church, the big church, and the emergent church are trying to meet with John, but John won't meet with them. So now these three pastors are lying to the bishop because I'm trying to meet with them. So I wrote him, when I heard about that, because he's like, these pastors have a good heart. They're good people. John's the one who won't meet with them. I wrote him. And he said, John, if you offer to meet with them, they'll meet with you. I said, great. And I wrote emails and made calls to meet with all of them at that point. The bishop then arranged a meeting with the painter and the president of the pastors group. And the presidents of the pastor group agreed to send his second. So the painter wrote another email. He said, he'll send it out to the members of the pastors group if you provide, stamped envelopes. The members of this organization, it was not public. This is a secret pastors group. Their names were not public. The bishop, when I asked the bishop for the names of the people so we can mail to him, he said, John, I'd rather give you the social security number for my kids than tell you the name of these people in this pastors group.
No, wow.
Yeah, none of this was public. So we provide the letters. We're on our way to drive it over there. And the bishop calls the painter and says, the president won't distribute the letters. So I called the president of this pastors group and said, he admitted, I haven't read Molly God. So this guy had signed the letter that was up at this point. I haven't read Molly God. His wife grabs the phone and goes, why don't you stop all this? And I said, who initiated all this? And she goes, I don't know. I go, the ambitious pastor has been attacking me publicly. The big pastor's been attacking me privately. I didn't initiate any of this. She just hung up the phone. The painter called the president, and the president claimed he had never talked to me. So now he's lying. The painter told him that his lying was problematic, and he didn't think the president was driving this, because we all think the ambitious pastor was driving this, even though he's not a part of this group. The painter asked for a meeting with the president, and the president said there would be no more meetings with us with any pastors. Like, literally, we're cut off. We're not ever going to be heard. Even though they promised all this stuff, they were never going to be heard. By this time, the big pastor had gotten back to me. The other two pastors had gotten back to me. All three pastors confirmed they were never going to meet with me. I had proofs and emails, and I sent it to the bishop saying, none of these will meet with me. And he said, well, there's other people who say you won't meet with them. Like, just distraction. Like, he's been proven wrong, just enabling this group. I said, who? He named this woman. I tracked her down. She goes, I do not want to be a part of this. I will never meet with you. So we got these people dead to rights. So the bishop just basically ignores me, and he tells the painter, look, maybe I'll give you credentials at my church and you can do ministry, under me. And the painter's a young guy. He kind of wanted to do that. All this stuff got dropped. Basically, this group of pastors lied, prevented us, and most of the pastors in this organization never knew that we were a part of any of this or had any of this issue. But they had a letter up that was completely false.
Can I just interrupt and ask a question here, please? The letter went up. The majority haven't read the book. I just have to clarify this.
Nobody read the book. Nobody read the book in that group of pastors. This was the ambitious pastor from the outside did this. Nobody read the book.
The letter's up, the book's there, but they've never read it, so they don't understand what's in the book. They just, it must be a feeling that they know that they're going to be wrong and that they just want to deny, they're in denial. And then now everyone's lying and enabling each other to try and distract from anyone meeting with you because they know they haven't read the book.
And they're all in agreement.
Yeah, I don't understand.
That was the bishop's goal. He was enabling these people because he never could get all of these pastors to agree because they're all just fighting, ripping each other up. So he was like, this is so great. We have a common enemy. It's like Hitler. We have a common enemy. So we're unified over this common enemy. This is great. And he wasn't going to ever have them talk to me. He didn't want to lose this. So now he has this unity of the pastors. And how long do you think that lasted?
Goodness.
3 months. Within 3 months, the ambitious pastor was back to attacking the big pastor because the big pastor talked to somebody about Islam. It was called Chrislam, how Christians and Islamic people can get together. He started attacking the big pastor for being into Chrislam and being with Islamic people. And all of a sudden, these pastors just fractured and fought like crazy. Then the big pastor finally opened up Modeling God and started trying to read it. He only got to page 27 and realized that everything that was written was false.
Everything that he had read, everything that was ever written that he'd understood was false.
He had never read the book.
This
big pastor never read it, but he had supported this ambitious pastor because his son was getting attacked. And then now when he got attacked, he went, well, what's the real deal? He opens up the book and realizes this guy's been always lying. And I've been siding with a liar. He couldn't get past page 27 of Modeling God. He couldn't read it anymore because all of a sudden he realized he had gotten deceived by this guy. Basically, every pastor in this valley got deceived by one pastor spouting a bunch of lies. And all he was trying to do was rip everybody up. And now they're all humiliated that they have all been bought into a guy who was all ripping them up and was enabled. This guy wouldn't have had the power if he didn't have this bishop enabling him. Yeah. So it was a bully and a bishop. A bully and an enabler basically ruined all of this information and got this letter up and was hurting all these people. So I met it with a lawyer. Now remember, I'm starting to go through this. This was 2009. I ended up declaring bankruptcy in 2010, but I got to start getting ready for bankruptcy. I can't get a job. This ambitious person's website, and now this letter is just really causing all these trouble. And so in order to get my bankruptcy going, they have to look into any assets I have. And this letter being published becomes an asset. Because if I can sue them and make enough money to pay this debt from owning this other company, then they'll take that. So now I'm getting legal opinions of what's going on. So I'm meeting with that and they're looking at all the stuff. Now, at the same time, one of the people from my group moved to New York City. She helped this woman, her name was Morgan, and in New York City, and Morgan started reading Modeling God, loved it. And all of a sudden, the pastor there didn't like it, found the letter, found the ambitious pastor, and he kicked her out of that church. So I know a person who did get kicked out of church over Modeling God. It wasn't me, but it was this woman. She had been from Texas. This ambitious pastor went on Facebook, found all her friends in Texas, and had all of them bully her into, you're going to go to hell if you keep reading that book. So now think about this. Like today we look at all this stuff and all these laws being broken, but this is 2009. This ambitious pastor is now stalking this woman and going to her high school and college friends on Facebook and having them bully her. and giving them false information. And these people won't listen because he's got them all ramped up and everything. So she ends up moving to the valley. She's basically got nowhere to go either. So she moves into the valley because of all this bullying. The lawyers say that there isn't enough money to cover my debts. However, the ambitious pastor sending this on church stationery would allow me to own his church. Because this is against the law. Everything these people were doing was breaking the laws of defamation. You and I covered this. They were spreading false things, in order to do harm. They weren't meeting. They were doing it in private. They were doing all this stuff. So yeah, it was lawyers jumped in and said, yep, the letter that this group of pastors put up, it breaks the law of defamation in the state of Wisconsin. The refutation this guy sent out, yep, breaks the law. These pastors are all breaking the law. So I had the lawyer send a letter to this pastor. Now, he had this site up, LeonhardEatsRocks.com, for 2 years. People told him to take it down. It was unseemly, et cetera. He never would do it. He gets a letter from my lawyer the next day, changed the name of the website to somewhere else. Because the letter essentially said, the fourth and final proof of defamation is the name of that website. Took it down. So now here's the thing. I'm going to go through this because this gets kind of tricky, and I want to make sure, and I do have notes for this because I want to make sure people understand this very clearly. The letter that these group of pastors put up and is still up to date on the internet. If you Google John Lenhart, you will see this letter. This letter breaks the law of defamation. The problem is for the last 12 years, when somebody gets help, if a friend of theirs goes, where are they getting this help from? And if they realize they're affiliated with me, they'll Google that letter, tell this person, and that person will stop getting help. And you mentioned it in the last episode. There's all these people who were getting help, and now they were prevented from getting help because of that letter. That letter doesn't hurt me, but it's hurt so many people. And I have heard every month for the last 12 years, I hear at least a person saying, hey, so-and-so, I was trying to help them, my uncle or my aunt in Ohio or, in California, and a friend of theirs found that letter and they're no longer getting help. And then these people end up on antidepressants, depression, suicide, all these things. That letter by this group of pastors is hurting other people. It's preventing other people from getting that information. To this day.
That's 12 years.
Yes, 12 years. So here's the thing. So I'm gonna go through this. So again, that letter is whispering. We talked about it in the last episode. It's defamation, which is the same thing. Man's law is defamation. God is called whispering. And if you whisper against a believer, it's an abomination to God, according to Proverbs. And I don't think people who commit abominations go to heaven. So you can take that. These people wouldn't meet with me. Nobody would meet with me and talk about this book, despite this bishop saying everybody would meet with me. And because it would make them heretics. Remember, their claim is I'm a heretic, but they would have to tell me what specifically is wrong and what specifically is the right answer. And if they're not right, they're a heretic. So they're not going to do that. No one's going to meet with me. And they're proving that you can't interpret text. So there's no benefit to them to meet with me because all it can do is prove they shouldn't be a pastor. So I was presenting a benefit to people and I was getting accused. Well, you must have done something. You think about it, I'm offering all these people. When people hear about it, they go, what? They wrote this letter? Well, John must have done something. And my point is that woman got raped. Well, she must have done something to deserve it. I didn't initiate any attacks. This entire thing. And there were people on the outside now going, well, John must have done something to deserve it. So that's kind of what I was dealing with, these people bearing false witness and everything. They would tell me when they found out that they'd broken the law. So you got all these Christians, I use the air quotes, found out they broke the law. They said, John, you can't sue. Now in Corinthians, it says Christians can't sue Christians. So when they say you can't sue, they're saying you're a Christian. If I'm not a Christian, I can sue. So now these people are admitting I'm a Christian. I said, well, that's fine. I have hundreds of emails with all the stuff you guys talked about. I'm just going to put them up on the internet and share them with everybody. If you do that, we'll sue. So they just admitted constantly confronting themselves that they aren't Christians. They're saying, I'm a Christian, that's why I can't sue. And they're saying they can sue, which means they're not a Christian. So they basically were saying, and the big pastor said to everybody, listen, we need to wait 2 years. The statute of limitations on this is 2 years. We need to just not go at John. We just need to leave John alone for 2 years and not do anything. And then we'll be by the statute of limitations on this letter, on all this other stuff. So they all knew they broke the law of the land. Now, they were breaking the law of God with whispering and against the brother. So notice, I tried to share with them, you're breaking God's law. They didn't care. I show them they're breaking man's law. Everybody stop. So that tells you who they really worship. That tells you who they're really afraid of. So I'm not afraid of anybody. I'm afraid of God, but I'm not afraid of any of them. So that's when the painter said to me, John, you can now forgive these people. Because one of the issues is in the Bible, you're not supposed to forgive a Christian. You're supposed to wait until they repent. You're supposed to forgive non-Christians. People in the church do it backwards. They attack non-Christians and they forgive Christians. But the Bible actually says the opposite. But he was right. These pastors proved they were not Christians and I could forgive them. And the benefit to forgiving them is, and we did a whole video on this, karma or justice. Because this is how God's will works. God can move for you if you have justice for you. God will move against you if you have justice against you. God is no longer a first cause because he gave that up to man on the sixth day. We're the first cause. He does everything in response. If we do everything in response, which is grace, letting him guide us, then all these things will happen for us. So the key to everything going good is people doing bad things against you, you forgiving them, and then all this good stuff can happen. So the painter was right. I was like, yeah, I can forgive these people. They're fighting God anyways. Moses and Samuel, the Bible said that too. They said to God, these people are doing these things against me. And God went, I'm not fighting you. Where'd you get you didn't invent this information. I did. They're fighting you. I was like, they're not fighting me. They're fighting God. This is the easiest thing. So I can forgive and God can take things off from me. And everything from that moment on, my life has just been all going awesome. So I want to zip through the rest of my life here. So in September, the emergent pastor announced that his church was finished. Okay. So after I forgive, the emergent church pastor is gone. Now, there was this guy who used to live in the basement of the emergent pastor's house for years. And when the church went away, he's like, what's going on? And he was one of these guys who went to that church and he was oblivious, one of the oblivious. And he finds out all the stuff and he finds out this John Lenhart's doing this and John Lenhart's doing that. So September of 2009, I get a phone call and he had just turned 25. And I get this phone call and I'm just driving. It was at night. I'm driving around. I get this phone call and he goes, John Lenhart, who the F are you? And I said, he goes, I've heard this, I've heard this, I've heard this. I have one question for you. Who the F are you? And I said, this is interesting. I said, because there are like 1,000 people, in this valley, all talking about me, and none of them will talk to me. You call me up and talk to me. You're like 1 out of 1,000. So the question isn't who the F am I? The question is who the F are you? Because I'm impressed. Well, that was Jonathan Fries who called me up.
Yeah.
And Jonathan said, okay. And we started talking and he shared, I turned 25 and I don't feel like a man. Could you help me with that? And I said, let's figure that out together. I am not a cult leader. I'm an administrator teacher. I'm trying to help everybody be the best them. Yep. Ayn Rand said, okay, a cult of individuals. Okay. I'm not interested. I'm interested. If that's what you're interested in, I'll help you do that. You can find out. He and I created this program, How to Be a Man. We took 19 to 29-year-olds through it, but it all started off of him saying that it's an amazing, group program. I'm sure sometime, Jonathan, you will talk about this, but we've helped guys be men. It's one of the biggest issues, in our country and a lot of other places. So that all happened. And, Jonathan and I are about generative community. One of the things Jonathan and I can do is we can get with people and we can form this community, and then it's generative. Everybody has more energy. And you know how we do it. We help people understand who they are uniquely, help them be able to communicate to each other. And then you start valuing each other and you have this generative community. That's what Jonathan and I are all about, creating generative communities. So I did file for bankruptcy in 2010. The big pastor fired his associate pastor, who was in the middle of us. So the associate pastor was out. And this was someone he had been in ministry with like 25 years. Just kicked him aside. I think he was just feeling so bad, and he was trying to run from how this whole thing turned into a mess and everything. My Modeling God went out of print. And the analogy I'd like to give you is Sir Isaac Newton wrote a book called the Principia. And it essentially in one book has everything that every high school and I'm going to say first year college student learns in physics was in one book. And when he issued it, no one read it. And the joke was when he would walk down the street, people would go, there goes the only man who understands the book that he wrote. Within 10 years, it was out of print. 10 years after he puts it out, people start reading it and going, this book has everything. This book's amazing. And they go to him, would you write another book? And he basically said, F you guys, I'm not writing another book. It took him like 27 years from the first book to write another book. There was only two things Sir Isaac Newton was really interested in. And you talked about one of them in the last episode. Of all the stuff, science, there were two things that he wrote more about than anything else. Number one, alchemy, which is formulation. And you know my formulation background. That a lot of what he wrote about was order of addition and formulation and all the stuff. That's, that was a big part of my history, and I've shared that. The other thing was the right interpretation of the Bible. And you had said that in the last episode is, let's go back to, he felt like this thing is contradictory and it shouldn't be. There's something in here. And he spent more of his time doing alchemy and trying to explain the Bible and writing about it than anything else. I feel in a lot of ways closer to Sir Isaac Newton than any other famous person in history, because that's really what my story has been about. It's been about alchemy, and it's been about, let's get the right interpretation of this thing out, because then it would help so many people. And that's the way Newton felt.
Newton attacked though.
Yeah. So, and you and I've talked about this, is that I got this audio series, The History of Science from Antiquity to 1700s. And the story of science is every guy who comes out with the truth gets killed. People don't like the right answer. They don't know how to fight the truth, because you can't fight the truth. So you fight the person given the truth. And I've said this to you, Colin, if I was born 200 years ago or before, I'd be dead. I would have never reached the age of 58, because I'm going to pursue the truth and people just hate it. It's just that today people hate the truth so much they go on the internet and write a letter and deceive all these people away from it. And as we look back through history, we're seeing history right now. Like for the last 12 years, people have been deceived away from this. One of the things that happened was the big pastor at this point, the painter went to counseling for his marriage, and his wife brought up me and being a cult, and my painter husband's in this cult. The counselor was in the big church, and he's like, I never heard any of this. Then he started asking around. The next time they met, he goes, holy moly, he goes, there are like at least 2,000 people in this valley talking about this issue right now in private. No one is talking publicly about this. I talked to a guy at the Christian radio station, had his own show over this whole area. He goes, John, you're the third rail. He goes, I could put you on the air this afternoon because I have that power, but my show will end tomorrow. Everybody knew this, and no one wanted to talk about this publicly. This counselor went to the big pastor, and he said, yeah, the big pastor said Os Guinness said that book's heretical. Now, some backstory. I had sent my book to Os Guinness. I told you, I sent it to a lot of famous people.
Yeah.
Os Guinness wrote me back years ago and said, I'm not going to read this. I'm too busy. Here's my advice. But I had his email address. I was on the phone with the painter. I get my book, my computer out. I go, 1 second. And I write Os Guinness. I have the emails. I thought you never said you read Modeling God. I'm talking to the painter. Some minutes later, I never did read it. I got off the phone. This big pastor who he knows said, you said it's heretical. I've never read it, Next day, I get an email from the big pastor. Why are you writing Os Guinness? Os Guinness wrote the pastor goes, why are you lying about me and defaming me to other people? So the level of just like lying and everything was just, it was enormous. Okay. And so just that's the type of people involved. It was at this time I went to the psychology professor because I was still working out the model for the mind and the brain. I still had my blog up. I'm still sorting this all out. That's when I met with the psychologist, and he said, you know what, there's nothing on a sheet of paper we don't know, but I've never seen it on one sheet of paper. I was doing the synthesis step with the mind and the brain. I had my model written out. I'd shown it to the psychologist. He said, you're doing it wrong. But I had been using it to help people.
Yeah.
And I got it from the Bible. So I was continuing to help people. In 2012, I sent hundreds of emails to a guy in Wisconsin, but outside of the Valley, because I was like, is there something I'm doing wrong?
Yeah.
Did I miss this? Like, this story is so ridiculous. And these pastors are such liars. I need a third party. And this guy's a big time perceiver. He used to call on this one radio show. I sent him all the emails. He looked through it. He's like, there's no way pastors act the way you say. Look, send me those emails. I met him in person, like, send them to me. I sent him. He's like, well, pastors around us aren't like this. Like, a third party looking at this is like, this is horrifying. Mm-hmm. Just horrifying that these pastors would act like this and write these letters and say and do these things. These are not good people. In January 2013, I retired. That's when I turned 50. In the Bible, these people retired at 50. So the Bible actually has this we call it the grandfather model. You're a leader from 25 to 50, and then you stop being a leader. You let the young people lead in a sense, and you're supposed to develop the next leader. The reason the kings fall apart is man's strategy is kings. You're a king till the day you die. Well, who is training up the next king? When you're the king, you're either leading or training, but you can't do both. One of them's going to suffer. So that's why it's a flawed strategy. The Bible doesn't have this king strategy. And that's why everything went the wrong way. God never wanted kings. You're supposed to have a leader and a wisest man. And when the leader and the wisest man become the same person, like the devil or like Solomon, it all goes bad. You're always supposed to have one of each. So I stopped being a leader in 2013. I shut down my blog because one of the goals of my blog was to find somebody in the world who also knew this information. There was nobody in this world, because maybe someone had learned it before me. That's why I had this blog, 1,500 posts over 7 years, getting it all over the world. No one in the world had the information that I had, was sharing it. No one was definitely getting attacked like I was getting. And so I shut all that down and I fully retired. I was no longer a leader. My full-time job was to develop leaders. That's when I was full-blown leadership development. In 2014, there's a pastor who's threatening to kill himself. And he goes to this radio show guy who puts him in touch with me. I meet with him. I help him not kill himself, basically. He asked Jonathan and I to teach us how to be a man class in his church. So in 2015, we are helping, him, 2014, 2015, we helped these guys. It was great. They all, 24 of these guys become men, and their wives would come up and shake Jonathan's hand or my hand, and we'd ask them what their last name was, basically. But they were all happy. Like, Jonathan has this plan. He can help these guys. And when guys take this course, they're like, I should have learned this when I was 13. Because every guy, I like to say, every guy, knows he's wrong. I like to tell women, every guy knows he's wrong. If you think he doesn't know he's wrong, you're wrong. Every guy's trying to be right. If you don't think he's trying to be right, you're wrong. Every guy's doing the best with the tools he's got. He's going to do something. All Jonathan and I would do is give them the tools and get out of their way, and they would just take off. So I know we have information that should be taught to, and that's when Jonathan and I are like, we should get this in the schools because these kids at 13 need this information. That's who needs this information. We need to get this into the schools. So this church starts taking off, right? It's 2015. Now, the pastor who had the ambitious pastor, he folded his church into another church. Because remember, I could have owned his church. Yeah. So he dissolved his church by folding into another church. We helped this pastor not kill himself. And a group of pastors hires the ambitious pastor. So the ambitious pastor took money to go to this town, Winchester, Wisconsin. I mean, it might have 24 people in it. This town's in the middle of nowhere, Colin. And they have a meeting to attack this pastor who didn't kill himself in his church. So you have a group of pastors paying a pastor to attack a pastor who didn't kill himself. The people from that church hear about it, they go to it. They ask the ambitious pastor to his face, what's your definition of grace? Because again, that was one of the things he was saying. He misquoted my definition, then called me heretical for it. He would never get his definition. They asked him point blank and he goes, there is no definition. So that's what I'm saying. This whole thing is a smoke screen.
Yeah.
That these people, they have no answers. They have nothing. But how bad do these pastors have to be to take money to attack a pastor who didn't kill himself? To me, that's just, I don't think these pastors have a good heart. In our area, in that area, the rate of mental issues is 3 times greater than the national average. It's more than 3 times the national average. And that was pre-COVID.
And is that because it's a religious state, a religious town?
Well, it's not a religious town. It's the people of religion fight, and all the people stay away from that. All the people who have any money and that have any sense, and any self-esteem, they stay away from that. But the thing is they're all trying to make money and be ambitious, and no one is getting the information. I look at this and go, my answer would be they were intentionally told to avoid the one piece of information that was going to help their mental health. Yeah. And so now we see 3 times worse than the national average in that area. That would be my point. Okay. So because they have man's strategy in place of God's, and if you just look at God's strategy as the truth, it's just not even that's from God, just look at it as the truth, it helps people. Okay. Yeah. And so that's what I was doing. So you think about it, all these people in this valley, they got deceived away from the right information because one pastor and one enabler. And I feel sorry. I feel sorry these people see that letter and avoid getting the help they need. I feel sorry for them. I feel and that they're deceived. They're just deceived, and I feel bad for them. But it's all value to me. The longer that letter stays up, the more value it is to me. They're paying for it. The people who put that letter up and the people who talk about me, there's still people to this day, every month, there's still people who talk to other people about me. I don't even live in that valley anymore. I live 100 miles south of there. Still talking, still to try to go, well, don't do that. They don't have any answers, but they're going to tell you what to avoid. So you still have all that stuff. So I decided, and that's when I moved down here. In 2017, I was like, you know what? These people are they're evil. I mean, they're hurting other people. They're taking these people down. They're evil. My wife got this job 100 miles south, and I moved. I stopped once I left the city limits, Colin. I took my shoes off, shook the sandals, in September 2017, moved down here. And I basically said, you know what? Now all of those pastors are responsible for doing at least as good a job as God would have done through me in that valley. It's up to them. 3 months later, the big pastor killed himself.
Wow.
So he had gotten depressed 3 months before that, gone to the counselors in his church, and then killed himself. Now realize, when he was writing me those emails attacking me, you know, with the Os Guinness and everything, he kept saying, John, I am going to keep telling people to avoid you. Because his counselors would try to help people. They wouldn't get helped. And then people would be on their last hope. Jonathan used to say last resort. And they would reach out to Jonathan or reach out to me or reach out to our group. And they would get well and then join our group. And part of the email that he was sending me is basically between the lines. He was afraid I was going to say, hey, your counselors can't help anything, buddy. We're helping them. But when we were never going to do that, we were always, I offered this information to him. I said, the big pastor, you could own this. He had a platform. He was on the board of the National Evangelical Christian Church Association. He was that big of a pastor, had this big church. He was this nationally recognized guy. I'm like, you got a platform. You could share this. I'll give this. I have an email going, the people I helped all came from your church. Here, you can have it for free. I just want the information. I don't even want to write a book. You can have this information free. Get it out. Now he's depressed. His counselors can't help him. And he knows that when his counselors couldn't help somebody, Jonathan and I could help somebody. All he'd have to do is admit he's wrong. And that's the issue here, Colin. You know how hard it is for people to admit they're wrong? Some people would rather kill themselves than admit they're wrong.
Yep, and that's the truth, the absolute truth, nothing but the truth. And I have seen, and I've been through situations totally different than yourself, but the outcome's the same. You know, these people are still talking about me daily. They're not here in my life. I don't deal with them anymore. I don't speak to them, but they're still doing it. And the more that they are talking, the more that I'm not engaging, the more that I've forgiven, the more that I get to move on and be happier. And every single day, their life becomes worse. And, you know, I don't wish unhappiness on them. I wish them healing. I wish them love. I wish them all these things, because partly by them being so bad, my life's got so much better. So I'm grateful for that as well. So from where you're coming from, and, you know, we don't want people to check out early. You know, that's not why we're here. We've all got purpose and we've all got to come here for. But, you know, if it gets to the point between ego and being able to go and help other people, and people choose ego, which most people do, this is where it's like taking themselves down. They are literally taking themselves down.
Right. And you know, the ambitious pastor left this area. He used to always accuse me of bringing psychology into the church. He left the area, went to another state, and advertised on Psychology Today to help people. So all these people, the people who signed that letter, they're no longer in ministry. All this stuff remains and has remained for the last 12 years. And what you just said was perfect. The only part I would add to it, and you already know this, but I want to accentuate this, is none of this stuff works for you unless you forgive these people. So you don't not only wish them harm, you're willing to help them. And, you know, Jesus on the cross is praying for people that are killing him at that moment. But I like to talk about Gandhi. Gandhi got attacked by these people. He didn't press charges. He actually, and then another group of people were doing illegal things. He tried to get them, he put them on trial. An all-white jury let him off the hook, but then the government fired him. They came to him and asked him for help to find a job, and he gave them help. And that's how this works. How does God's will work? It works by you being just, by loving. And when people persecute you, you forgive them. And then that means you're willing to help them. Then the justice is at your back. The last line of the Beatitudes, which shows spiritual maturity, it says, have counted all joy and be exceedingly happy when people speak falsely against you and persecute you, you know, and speak all kinds of false lies, because that's the way it was for the prophets and the apostles. So the goal, according to Jesus, is to get to the place that you can be happy and joyful when people are falsely attacking you. And the only way you get there is to truly want to help those people. And you're right, Colin, that's the key. And that's what I did in this, is I got to the place where I was like, you know what? I'm happy. I know I'm in the right. I know these people are lying. They need help. I feel bad for them. I'm going to forgive them. I'm not going to take out my justice. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. And if they ever came to me for help, I'd help them. And all of a sudden, my life takes off. Now, I thought this whole thing was over, Colin. And I had always planned to tell this story, except there's been an update, literally as we sit here today. So, wouldn't you know, in December of last year, that pastor group is deciding who they want to be the next president. And they decide the bishop is going to be the president.
No, the enabler.
The bishop is going to be in charge of the pastor group in 2021. Now, the associate pastor of the big guy, he's no longer at that church, and this guy killed himself. He brings up, we all, the reason why things are so bad, like the churches are just at each other's throat, it's nasty. And they're all talking about, why is there just log jam? What's going on? And the associate pastor says, I think this might have all started with the John Lenhart incident. Because now it's 12 years later, and he has seen me develop people into pastors. There's a guy in that pastors group who said 12 years ago, if John ever started a church, it would be a cult. He said that. He today looks at two guys that I developed as pastors. I'm not a pastor. I don't want to be a pastor.
Yeah.
I developed two guys as pastors, and he said to the bishop, I got one thing to say about John Lenhart. Look at the fruit. And his point was, these two young pastors are better pastors than any of us. And they came from John Lenhart developing them. Shouldn't that be enough? So here's a guy, 12 years, who flipped his opinion about me, just looking at all this. So this associate pastor said, we should bring John in and hear him. So they reached out to me in December to hear me. So this was December 7th. I went in and they heard me. And they asked me how they sinned against me. And I said, of all the sins, I'm only interested in the first one, because all the other ones were an effect of the first one. You never heard me. You heard the story. They would never hear me. They would never let me talk. I'm in with their officers and they're hearing me. So I get to tell my story. And I told the story up to their letter. So the last episode, I told them that story, and that was it. Because I wanted to give them a chance to pick a different path. I essentially said, let's wind this back to, there's this letter you're thinking about putting up. If you'd have met with me, then I wouldn't have cared you put up the letter, but you didn't meet with me. So now you're meeting with me, and I'm going to stop my story there. We can rewrite this story to something else. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did in December. Now, I can tell you, Colin, that I have always been trying to leave this situation. I have always believed. 12 years ago, I told the painter 12 years ago, I said, you know what? This information ain't getting into the church and helping people till I'm gone. It's just not. No. Everybody said, no, it's just not. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I've always wanted to be gone. So when this happened in December, I was like, I'm going to be gone in 2021. I'm going to be gone. Maybe I'll die, but who knows? But I'm going to be gone, because now this thing has finally happened, and I believed that's it. So I shared with them. They could have, all they had to do was say, we have met with John Lenhart. We advise everybody, if you have an issue, meet with him. And if anybody walks up to you and says something, ask them if they've met with John. Because what happened was the bishop was getting phone calls in November, December from people going, you're going to be the next president? Well, John Lenhart, like there's still like people going out of their way to call up this guy and talk about John Lenhart.
Yeah.
I'm 100 miles away. Doesn't matter. I'm still in the state. So that's where kind of this was. So that's all they had to do was write that letter. Well, this bishop, I met with him 4 times in the last 8 months. And he's just not moving on any of this stuff. So after 8 months, so this literally just happened this month, July. We have a meeting, and I say to him, I said, you still thought, because he had said in the first meetings that I wouldn't meet with the big ambitious, and emergent pastors. I'm like, I showed you emails. You still to this day think they have good hearts and they would have met with me and it was somehow my fault. Then we met. And then I basically say to him, you still thought they weren't going to meet with me 12 years later. He goes, I never said that. 3 minutes later, and I wrote it down. I wrote his words down. Those guys got a good heart. They wanted to understand you. He says, my fault. I don't know if he's got dementia, but like 3 minutes later, he's contradicted himself. 12 years later, we're down the same path. This bishop still believes this emergent pastor, this big pastor who killed himself, and this ambitious pastor were all good people who were always trying to reach out to me, and I must have done something wrong. He still believes that 12 years later. So I realized I challenged him, and the reason this came out is I challenged him. I said, find one person who'll meet with me. Find one person. Who's read the book and can disagree. He found a guy who read 5 chapters. That was it. And so my point to him is, you can't find anybody. And he says, I get all these phone calls. He spent a month saying, will you meet with John Leonard? No one. He realized he was backed into a corner. He had taken this challenge to find somebody. He can't find anybody, but people are still talking. So he just went to his whole card and said, those guys back then would have met with you. You caused all this problem back then. I realized I was at mid self-esteem with him and with my past because I wanted him to say, you were right. If I was at low self-esteem, I'd want people to say, you were right about this issue 12 years ago. And I'd want to hear it every day. Mid self-esteem, I just needed one guy to say it. Remember what happened with the fragrance? And my buddy from Procter & Gamble, the guy, when he did that, I was mid self-esteem. That's all I was looking for. During that meeting where this guy had only read 5 chapters, I realized I reached high self-esteem. And I told him, I said, you know what? I love that letter being up. That letter proves I am the only person in the world to have a non-contradictory definition for God. I'm the only one. Because no one else is running to claim it. No one wants to take the abuse. I've taken over it. I am the only one in the world who's done that. If I'm going to walk through eternity being the guy who tried to help people understand God objectively enough to interact with him better, I'll take that title. Yeah. I'll take that title for eternity. So I love that letter. I don't need anything from these people. This is done. This is done. There's no reason for us to have any more meetings. This is done. I said, out of the goodness of my heart, I'm telling you, you guys are hurting yourself by leaving that letter up, because every day people are not getting help because of that letter, and it's working against you guys. But it's all value to me. My life is taken off. Everything is great. I get an opportunity, Colin, because I said, this is it. We're done. Let God judge between us. Let God remove us however we need removed. I get an opportunity to leave the state. So I am now moving out of Wisconsin.
No way.
Days after that, we make that decision, my wife and I. Days after that, the bishop writes me an email and says, hey, I want to challenge you. Why don't you walk away from Jonathan's church, Joel's church, and the church we helped that the guy who tried to kill himself? Because those are the only 3 churches I will set foot in. I won't set foot in any other church.
Yeah.
Those are the only 3 that I think are any good and can handle the truth. Why don't you just walk away? Now, this guy doesn't understand what I do. I'm not in charge of those. I'm not the pastor. I'm not in charge of those churches. I develop people into who they are. That's why those people are so good. But their mentality is, no, you know, these churches, they get together. Who's got the biggest church? It's racist. The biggest church, it's one measure. The guy with the biggest church has everybody meet there and says, essentially, one day, if you have the biggest church, you can have this meeting. And that's what it's all about. And I'm over all of you. And that's why there's all this abuse. I am out there developing people. Psychology works the same way. Yeah. Psychology doesn't understand what I'm doing. I'm trying to help these people be more themselves. I'm not trying to help them not do this bad thing and act like this robot. So this guy writes me an email where he clearly still, after 12 years, doesn't get what I'm doing. I'm developing people into more who they are. They're not beholden to me. I'm not a cult leader. They're not mindlessly doing what I'm saying. They're doing what they're doing in their uniqueness. But he says, why don't you step away? And I think all this will fix up. So he had this strategy for me to step away. I wrote him back and said, if I step away for a year and this doesn't all fix, will you step away for a year? I'm not making that deal. I'm not doing that. So I am now going to leave. And my last day is going to be the day next week of our last show, which will be in number 104. You and I said at the start of this, we're going to do 2 of these a week for 52 weeks. We are going to end next week on 104. So our second show next week will be the final show. And like an hour or two after that show, I will be getting in a car and driving south, and we'll talk about the location and everything next time. But yes, this whole thing has come full circle, Colin. 12 years of all this stuff, and it literally happened this past week while we are planning all this stuff and going this direction. So I am kind of freaked out by the timing. But yeah, I've spent half my life in Wisconsin, and it is time for me to go. And I forgive all these people.
That has led, like, I've got goosebumps all up my arms. You can't see it in this because there is certain, I just don't understand how everything does come full circle. And we don't realize until we let go and forgive and then offer to help that allows us to let go from that bit. And that's where karma does its bit. And what's just about to come in your life, and I can tell you this in the bottom of my soul, what's about to come in your life is going to be bigger than anything you've ever had.
Oh, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. What's happening to me and my wife. Literally, it is a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Unbelievable. And I just, sorry, I'm rendered completely speaking. I can't even think of anything how to finish it off. So I'm going to let you do that, John, because, yeah.
Next week, we are going to have 2 shows that are going to summarize this entire journey that we've been on. And I will tell you that when we're at the end of the last episode, it'll fit perfectly with the very first episode we did. I think when people go back and watch our first episode after going down this road, we kept every promise we made, Colin, in our very first episode.
Yes, we did. And we're going to keep carrying on with that. And it's only going to get bigger. It's amazing. Thank you so much, John. I am so grateful for your time and for your story. And I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take it easy.